But I do think that, that was to this day probably the most difficult period of my life. Moved to Toyama Prefecture, this tiny town, 10,000 people or so. It's basically me and like 9,999 Japanese people. And that was super interesting.
Your first sale took 12 months. With everything you know now, how long will it take you to get that first sale?
I was working on like one of the kind of the top startups here in Japan. And I saw that as a big risk. But looking back, it's like, was it really?
The risk is probably not to do anything.
I think that's the bigger risk.
Welcome to the InnoHyve Podcast. In today's episode, we sit down with Eric Turner, founder and CEO of Japandev, a very popular job board for developers. Japandev connects English-speaking tech professionals with great job opportunities here in Japan's IT scene. As always, links to learn more about our guests are in the description below. We discuss Eric's journey, how he got into entrepreneurship, its challenges, and why every entrepreneur should consider starting their own venture at some point in their career. We feel incredibly fortunate to interact with such inspiring people, and we're on a mission to share that inspiration with you. So, you would like to support us? Please like, subscribe, and share this episode. Enjoy, and don't forget to stay curious. Eric, thank you very much for being on the InnoHyve Podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was really looking forward to this one, man. On a daily basis, I always hear about you because I talk to candidates who usually apply through Japandev, etc. But today, it's really about showing who's the man behind the Japandev, and I guess let's go into it. And to start, who is Eric, and how do you end up in Japan here?
Yeah, so I was born in the U.S. Near Philadelphia on the East Coast, and I had pretty much a typical upbringing up until really college. When I guess after I graduated, I kind of, was thinking, what do I want to do with my life? Basically, it's a big question. And I was looking at, the potential of a career as being a software engineer in the US because I had studied software engineering in college. And I guess I didn't really feel ready to do that yet. So I started looking at some alternative options. And I heard that there was basically a way to move to Japan as an English teacher, and it was pretty easy to do. You could get a visa and everything through that, that program. So I applied, and I became an ALT, and I did that for a year, and basically moved to Toyama Prefecture, this tiny town, 10,000 people or so. It was basically me and like 9,999 Japanese people, and that was super interesting as well. I did get to teach English there for a bit, but then pretty quickly after that, just 1 year doing that, I decided I needed to get back to software engineering, which was really my plan, and either go back to the US, which is what I was thinking I'd probably do, or maybe move to Tokyo. And since I hadn't really gotten to see the big city or anything yet, I was just in that small kind of town. I wanted to see the other side of Japan. So I opted to actually just move to Tokyo for a bit. And essentially I had a 3-month, time period where I had to either get a job or leave because I had no visa. My previous instructor visa from the English teaching had expired. So I had a bit of a crunch period there for 3 months, but I was able to find a job. And as a software developer, actually a Ruby developer at a startup, very small startup, Japanese company. And that was how I was able to get that next visa and continue my kind of career here in Japan.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you end up in fully Japanese environment,
100%.
First time abroad as well?
Yeah, I mean, living I had done a homestay just for a month or so back in high school, actually, which is one reason that I was so interested in Japan.
Okay.
But that was my first time really living abroad, and it was a lot to take in. It was a challenge, I wasn't sure I was going to make it. I thought I might have to go home so many times. But in the end, I was able to find a company to sponsor my visa and, start working as a software developer.
Yeah. When was that?
This was probably 2014.
Okay.
So I first arrived in March 2013 as an ALT, did that for 1 year, and then came to Tokyo about a year later, so March 2014.
Okay, so you arrive in Tokyo, you speak a bit of Japanese, I assume, at the time?
I already spoke decent Japanese.
Okay.
In fact, that first year, since I had actually studied a bit in college, just as an elective, I didn't major in it or anything like that, but I just got into it kind of by chance. So that was another part of it, really. I wanted to work on the language too. And I thought if I could get a job in Tokyo, then I could kind of kill two birds with one stone and continue to, study the language while also getting to get that engineering experience, which is what I was really looking for. So I was like, yeah, I'll give Tokyo a shot. And so I could already kind of get by, but I think maybe that first year I got like JLPT N2. So yeah, exactly. So like I had already a decent, level, and then maybe a year and a half or so later I hit N1. So at that point I was like pretty good after working in Japanese, because there were no other English speakers at my company. So after like a year or two of that, I got the N1 and was pretty comfortable at that point.
Wow. Okay. So basically, you arrive in Japan with already some kind of Japanese, I assume, as well. And
Yeah, fairly basic. And I was definitely a little surprised when I first arrived because I had studied it, like I mentioned, in school. And I had maybe a little bit of an inflated understanding of my own level. And it was, a little surprising when I arrived and would try to go to like Mr. Donut or whatever, and they would ask me these, crazy Japanese questions that were nothing like what I'd read in my textbooks, right?
Yeah.
So that took a lot of getting used to. So I wasn't quite as fluent as I thought I was, but after a few years, I think I got to a pretty good level.
It's impressive. And like, so you arrive in Tokyo, you're like, you have all this pressure about, your visa expiring.
Right.
No experience in software development, actually.
No.
Right. So that's also, and no job boards like Japandev or Tokyo Dev out there. So how did you tackle the problem? Like, how did you approach it?
It's a good point. Yeah. So it wasn't really like it is now with, the various job boards. So luckily, like I mentioned, I had some, familiarity with Japanese, so I was able to use some Japanese tools. So Wantedly already existed.
Okay.
I don't know if you've worked with Wantedly at all. It's a Japanese, kind of social media hiring tool. And that was like relatively new actually at the time, but I used that to get in contact with some startups. I believe that's how I actually got my first job. But it was all like Japanese messages back and forth and stuff like that. Thankfully, I was able to kind of do that to a level where, I would get a response and whatnot. But I do think that, that was to this day probably the most difficult period of my life because I knew I had this 3-month, period. And I got like this room in a share house, basically. It wasn't even a room. It was like a 3-person room, me and 2 other guys in this one tiny space. And it was like, I don't know, 50,000 yen a month.
Yeah.
So like the cheapest room I could find in Tokyo, basically. And I knew that I had those 3 months, and so it was really a lot of just, building side projects and stuff like that, getting some code up on my GitHub since I was trying to prove that I could do some coding, even though I hadn't actually got that experience, right? So yeah, it was just a lot of late nights in McDonald's. I was drinking, 100 yen coffees just until like, the middle of the night, building these like Ruby on Rails applications to try and show to companies, and of course just sending messages to every company I could possibly think of. Most of my clients now, the companies that I work with, I applied to back then 10 years ago, the ones that existed already, right? And none of them I think even responded. Not that that's not anything against them, because I wouldn't have either. I had no experience, no visa, no money, like no real prospects, you know what I mean? So it's kind of amazing that I was able to get a chance at all, given how I didn't really have any of that stuff that you need to really get a job. But yeah, so I'm really grateful that I was able to get that opportunity anyway, and that they kind of took a chance on me.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like persistence. Like, I mean, you really want to stay in Japan as well, I guess.
That's the thing, yeah.
Yeah. How would you, if you could give like a step-by-step plan to someone in that exact situation right now, with time passed by, and like, how would you tackle the problem?
Yeah, you mean if you're already here in Japan?
Yeah, someone in your same situation, because I mean, I'm on the other side where I meet a lot of people in that situation. They just did a boot camp and they quit their like teaching job, and they're in that situation I just actually had. Like, how would you approach it? Because I mean, you mentioned developing your portfolio, for example, but like, would you be able to kind of like give like a 4 or 5 step plan actually to people in that situation?
Yeah, definitely. So usually you're going to be on the tourist visa, basically, if your previous visa or whatever expires, or if you haven't got one yet. So you will have likely 3 months, and I think really the first thing you need to do is just networking. The more people in the tech industry here that you can meet and just talk to, the better. Some percentage of those will lead to you actually being able to apply to companies and having a little bit more of a, your foot in the door. So yeah, just meetups, there's something going on like pretty much every night in Tokyo.
Yeah.
So just get out there, actually talk to people, find out who's hiring, because there are always going to be certain companies that are like in kind of a growth stage right now, and they just need lots of people, and that changes. So the best way to find out who that is at any given time is to go and actually talk to people, and then just apply. I think Japandev is the site that I built to help people do that. So hopefully that's one of your destinations. There are a few others as well. You could use the Japanese sites as well. If you do speak, like the more Japanese you have, the better. So I would recommend stuff like Wantedly as well. I'm not a huge fan of like the super general job boards with like massive amounts of jobs, because I feel like it can be a bit of a, I guess it could be a bit of a pitfall for people where you can sometimes end up at a company that is not that great or not really set up for foreigners, right? Especially if you don't speak Japanese or something like that. And it can lead to kind of a negative experience. So I do, even if you feel like like it's urgent to find something, I do recommend that people try to be like pretty selective despite that, and don't take kind of like a low ball offer at like a kind of questionable company that doesn't really know how to work with foreigners just to stay in Japan, just to get the visa.
Yeah.
I feel like I see people do it, and it usually does not work out, unfortunately. Networking, I feel like, is the biggest thing, and then just apply to as many jobs as you can, but put effort into each application. Don't just spray and pray, please.
Yeah.
People say it's a numbers game. That's technically true.
Yeah.
In the number of applications that you send, but you still have to put the effort into each one. Otherwise, there's no point. You know what I mean? Really just put in the efforts. I would tailor your resume and everything to each job specifically, so that they kind of see the keywords as quickly as possible when they're looking at those. I guess those are really the main things. And I think if you do that, usually you can find something. Of course, if you're a developer, then having a GitHub, having some proof that you can actually do the job, and you can show to companies and say, hey, look, you are a Ruby company. Here's some Ruby that I wrote on GitHub.
Yeah.
You can check it out. It's exactly the kind of thing that your engineers are doing day to day. Like, can we talk more? That's going to be a lot higher of a chance of getting a response than just a basic email that's like, hey, I hear you're hiring. Can I apply, please? So the more kind of artifacts you can create to kind of show that you are worth taking a chance on, the better.
Several really important things that you mentioned, like for example, putting a standard, right? Like you say, because I think when people are in that situation, they're okay to suffer, but it doesn't mean you're willing to suffer and being in a bad environment for like the next coming 2-3 years, so to speak. So
it's tempting.
Yeah.
And I had some offers like that from like just kind of questionable like gaming companies or whatever, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we'll pay you 2.6 million yen a year or whatever, right? Which is like,
didn't even know it was legal.
Exactly. That's technically livable, I think, if you're very frugal, but it's like usually those companies, they're going to be using kind of outdated tech, which means that the skills you learn there probably aren't going to transfer to other companies very well. So there's a tendency to get stuck there. Usually there's going to be, all the kind of Japanese black company issues that you see, like long hours, overtime, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes there's power harassment and things like that. Basically, the negative side of the Japanese like work kind of style are all things that you're going to run into, or at least there's a much higher chance that you will. So I was, I decided I was going to hold out, basically. And I didn't take any of those offers. And at like kind of the last second, actually, before I was going to have to go home, I found one company, it doesn't exist anymore. It was kind of bought out, but this like fashion app company actually that was willing to hire me. So it worked out for me. And I think, especially now, because that was 10 years ago, and things have grown so much. So I think it's a lot easier now. So if you really, even if you're just here for 3 months, if you put in the time and use that, use the time effectively, I think you can find something.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the job boards are there. I mean, LinkedIn is huge as well. Like, I personally, my whole career is built on LinkedIn.
That's the other one, actually. LinkedIn is huge too.
LinkedIn
Absolutely
is huge.
Use LinkedIn.
Yeah, and like back to what you're saying as well, like getting paid 2.6, even if the job is great, I mean, you feel so undervalued because you will be networking, you will meet people that make twice more than you do.
Yes.
They do the same job, and it's, I think, mentally really draining as well for people, right?
Exactly.
Your willingness to learn and like.
And sometimes people will say like, oh, that's okay, even if the job is not ideal, it's not using the technologies I want to like work on. I'll work on like side projects and stuff outside of work and then get the next job based on that. And then they never do. Because usually there's like long hours, because it's that type of job that requires you to put in these long hours, and then you're tired and you end up not doing the other things outside of work
Yeah.
because you get home and you're just tired, you know, on the weekends you want to relax or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just see so many people get stuck, you know, and it's really a shame because then what
Yeah.
happens also is there's this kind of vicious cycle where they go online. Sometimes they just, you know, decide, actually, I don't even want to live in Japan,
Yeah.
right? They leave and then they go online, they go on Twitter or whatever, and they talk about how Japan sucks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, don't move here. And it's like, well, it's
Yeah.
actually, it depends on the kind of micro situation. And it's true that you got to be careful. You can end up in a
Yeah.
situation like that, and people do, sadly. But like, if you're a lot more selective about like the companies that you're working for and things like that, then you can also have a really great experience. And I consider myself an example of that too. So I'm, you know, I
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
to explain that to people, but I know it's tempting also.
Yeah, for me, my my kind of like benchmark is always like, if I would be just happier doing the same job at home, why would I be here?
That's a
Because
great question.
I'm just looking at it from that perspective. I'm always like, hey, is it really worth it to be here? Because I can probably do the same
It's a great
or
lens to look
more,
at it through,
right?
actually.
Yeah,
And I think being aware of that will help you make the right decision.
yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing you probably did really well is, I mean, so everything we just mentioned is like probably to get yourself interviews with companies, right?
Yeah.
But then with no experience, again, in a situation where you go to a company saying, hey, by the way, you need to sponsor my visa and everything as well. Like, you're not the perfect applicant,
No.
right? But you still did well in the interviews. Like, what kind of advice do you give to people when it comes to like interviewing for startups specifically?
Yeah. I was a little bit of a unique case potentially because I was interviewing mostly in Japanese. Because, like I said, I reached out to all the big kind of companies that were hiring at the time, the kind of international ones. Couldn't really get my foot in the door at any of them, just because like you mentioned, I really didn't have the attributes yet that you need to really get noticed by those companies, which meant that I was looking more at the smaller Japanese domestic companies, which was totally fine. There's some good companies in that kind of area as well. But it does mean that a lot of the interviews and stuff are more Japanese, and I was looking at more positions that required Japanese as well. So actually one unexpected positive was that, because you might think, oh, you had to do the interview in Japanese. That is like, that must have been so harrowing and like scary, right? Actually, not really in my case, because I think when people see me, right, this obviously foreign guy, obviously I'm not even half Japanese or
Expectations are
anything.
low.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's 100%. Like, they think that there's no way this dude speaks Japanese when they see me walk in. So the fact that you can speak it at all actually
Yeah.
allows you to start the interview off on a positive and be like, oh, wow. So that their actual initial impression of you, if you can even speak like a decent amount, you don't have to be great at
Yeah.
all. I was not.
Yeah.
But it actually allows you to get off on like a really positive foot in the interview, I found. So yeah, that was unexpected.
Yeah, I think it also shows people that you're serious about staying in Japan. Like, you did some
Yeah.
effort and you're into the language and you're trying it out. And because companies sponsoring your visa and like hiring foreigners, they take a big risk, right? Like,
Yes.
so showing just that, like just introducing yourself in Japanese and just trying is so big. Like,
Right. And if you look at the like psychology of the hiring manager, that's totally what they're thinking about. You're 100% right. It's like, is this person a flight risk essentially? You know, are they really going to be in Japan for the you know, long term? And other than that, like, are they a good fit for like our team? Are they able to communicate in the way that we need them to? These are the things that are going through that person's head, right? So if you can quickly provide like proof that like, yes, I've put in effort, because even just getting to the point where you can do like an interview decently well in Japanese, that's going to take a significant amount of effort, right?
Yeah.
Probably hundreds of hours. So it's like, okay, I've invested. That means that there's a lower chance that you're a flight risk, right? And then through the actual discussion and whatnot, they can kind of, you know, feel out even further, like whether you really are planning to, like whether or not you're serious about really being here long term. So I think that's one of the big things they look for. So the more like proof you can do,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's one way of doing it. And I mentioned like the if you're a software developer, like having a GitHub, and that's another form of proof. So that's what I always tell people. It's like the more like artifacts that you can kind of throw up to just prove, like that you've put in effort and you know you're serious about this, like the better your chances of getting an offer are going to be.
Yeah, I think especially nowadays where it's all about like, are you willing to learn new things, right? Are you willing to
Yes.
solve problems? And if you can show that you're doing that during your free time, like, okay, you're probably qualified already enough for a
huge.
startup.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically then you get your first job in that startup, like, which is a great achievement. And walk me through like the journey, I think, until Mercari, and like then we'll get into Japandev.
So the first job that I got was at a company called Vasily Inc. So it was a fashion app essentially where you could create, you could basically, it was like kind of a social media type app where you could create outfits basically and like with your friends and whatnot. So wasn't really, not something that I really had experience in at that point, but beggars couldn't really be choosers at that point, and they were using the tech stack that I really wanted to get into, Ruby and stuff, so I chose them, and it was actually a really great experience. I worked with some really top people that, to this day, I'm amazed at like the skill level, because going in, that was a question that I had, right? Like, what is like the kind of technical level
Yeah.
coming from the US, and it was kind of an unknown for me because
Yeah.
code is English, and like I know Japan's not like the best country when it comes to English skills and things like that. So, is there going to be like kind of a drop off in like the skill level of the engineers? No, there's not, by the way, at all. So I actually learned a ton. I got experience building like web applications, did like Ruby on Rails, and then just did that for about maybe a year and a half or so. And then I moved to a company called Gunoshi, which is a news app. It's similar to Smart News, if you've seen them. It's essentially a Japanese, like, kind of curated, like machine learning kind of based
Okay.
news app for people. There was just a period of time, it was like 2015, 2016, when those were like all the rage, and I just wanted to work in that industry for a bit. And then after that, I changed jobs again to actually kind of a small company called Quipper,
Okay.
which not super well known, I don't think, but actually a really great
Got acquired
company.
by Recruit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were bought out by Recruit.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
joined right after that, but it was a super interesting company actually, like very international. They had teams like in around Southeast Asia and places like that. So that was cool. But I also got to see Recruit, which I didn't really know much about them at the time, but super fascinating company, by the way.
Yeah.
They own Glassdoor, they own Indeed. It's like one of the biggest like recruiting businesses really in like the world, and super unknown outside Japan. Everyone in Japan knows it, of course. If you're on a train, you'll probably see at least one ad of theirs,
Yeah.
like on every train car you're in. If you actually look. So super fascinating company. So I get to work with like people directly from them, and it kind of got absorbed basically into Recruit. It's just Recruit marketing partners now. They have a bunch of different, companies underneath the Recruit umbrella. But that was a super cool experience too. I got to see how they work and everything. And then after that, I switched jobs one more time, and I actually joined Mercari, which, especially at the time, was like one of the kind of most prominent Japanese startups. I mean, to this day, it is, one of the biggest exits ever for a Japanese startup when they IPO'd. And I actually joined like right before the IPO.
Nice.
So I got to see that process, which was fascinating. I didn't have any stock options or anything because I literally joined like a month before or whatever. But still, it was really
Part of the change.
It was a fascinating moment in time, though. I think they IPO'd at like $7 or $8 billion or so in market cap, which was unheard of for a Japanese startup, and they did it in like 5 or 6 years after creating the company. So truly like hockey stick growth. Silicon Valley type exit. I knew people that made millions of dollars from it, stuff like that, which was crazy. So I worked there for about 3 years, and then Japandev started as a side project while I was at Mercari, back in like, that's a good question, maybe 2019, or maybe starting to write some code in like 2018 or so, and then really starting to actually try and sell it and like turn it into a business in like 2019. So I was at Mercari, and the first really like year and a half or so, it was a side project, so I had the basic website up. In fact, it didn't actually start as a job board. It was more like, the idea was that I had changed jobs so many times and gone through this process of researching companies so many times and been here in this industry long enough now that I felt like I had a good handle on what the top kind of companies were. So the idea was really to just share that information with people, because whenever I would talk about these companies like Mercari and places like that, people would always be interested in that. And
people from overseas or people in Japan?
People, from overseas as well, but people, other people in Japan too, because they'd be at like these, more legacy type startups, or like not even really startups, but like Japanese tech companies, and they would be really interested to see like, oh, there's this kind of cohort of companies that are more like Silicon Valley inspired, doing things like kind of the global way, and I basically made a big list of those. and that I had kind of come across and just, from the meetups and whatnot, talking to people and discovered were like doing things that kind of international way. And I just had the initial version of Japandev was basically just like 50 of those. It was a list. There were no job posts. It was just like Mercari, and some international companies like Indeed was up there. I think Reactor. It was like very modern. I think it's from Finland actually. Company that I had come across that had like this very European like work style, and just a bunch of companies like that. It was like, in fact, it was like a ranked list. I think Indeed was number one. And yeah, it was like companies that pay well, that have good kind of international environments, basically. And yeah, that's how it started. And that, I think, was somewhat interesting to people. It got like a pretty good initial like, amount of views from people who were like, oh wow, I didn't know about these companies. I didn't know you could earn salaries like this. Cause I had like some salary data and stuff like that. And I think it was higher than people expected. So from there,
How did you get the data? You went to those companies to ask all this stuff, or it was like, how did you get the
I
data?
didn't really ask the companies directly, no.
Yeah.
So it was more like a few companies had them like in job posts.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, there were certain tricks and stuff that you could do. Like sometimes recruiters would have the data.
Yeah.
So like, and as you know, like a lot of times recruiters, they won't post the company name directly in the job descriptions. And as a result of that, they can put a little bit more information like salary and things like that. So I could kind of like figure out which company it was based on, that type of thing. Yeah. And I just seen enough data points where I could kind of figure it out for not all the companies at all, but like a few of them. And I think that was interesting to people. But immediately though, the question was like, okay, how do I apply?
Yeah.
Because like, okay, you told me about this company, and I think I thought that people were like me, and they are, creating Trello boards with like all the companies in Japan that they want to one day work for, and like going through it painstakingly and learning all this information about all of them. It turns out, no, that's not. That's just me because I'm really a nerd about this stuff for whatever reason. And most people just want an apply button, basically. Like, oh, this company looks cool. I would like to apply to a job there. Please let me do that, basically. So then I was like, okay, obviously I need to add actual jobs. So that was where I actually tried to turn it into a business. And I talked to some companies and was able to actually get like some contracts with some companies. And that was how it turned into an actual business. And so I can talk more about that kind of process because it was not smooth sailing from then. You might think, oh, you had some companies on board, people started applying, you started making money. No. It was about a year between when I first added like the jobs feature where like people could actually apply, and were they to join, I would make money, and then my actual like first sale. So that was tough. But yeah.
Walk us through the process. Like, I mean, it's super interesting because basically your journey to get that first job and everything. I guess you work at Recruit as well. You start really understanding stuff like on a deeper level.
A bit more.
You see Mercari, you see the success. Like,
Yeah.
And like you say, then you realize, okay, it's not just about sharing information, it's about also taking people's hand and actually guiding them towards applying.
Yeah.
But then, okay, now, well, you have the apply button and most companies can just say, well, thank you very much, but we're not going to pay you. Like, how do you make it a business?
One key thing I did was I went to my own company first,
Okay.
which I was very lucky in that I was working at Mercari, and they're like super global. A lot of companies here won't even allow you to create side projects and earn any kind of like side income and things like that. So the fact that they were even willing to do that was really cool. And I actually talked to my manager at the time and was like, hey, I'm building this thing. Like, it was a little sketchy actually because they were on it. Mercari was on the list. And I was like, if necessary, I can kind of remove them, if you don't want me like talking about the company publicly or whatever, since I'm an employee. And then all their kind of competitors.
And they were public at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was really amazing actually that they allowed me to even do this.
True.
I don't think that they envisioned that it would actually become like a business. I think, they were just like, yeah, I guess that's okay. We don't have they checked like the handbook or whatever. And they were like, okay, there's no rule against this.
Yeah.
Because we don't have one yet. We haven't needed to create one yet, basically. But no, they were super cool about it. And they let me continue working on it even when I was like charging. And then I actually just went to them and was like, hey, you're kind of the ideal client for this actually. And it was really helpful because I could have just like a frank discussion with them and be like, hey, what would you pay for something like this, basically? I think it could be a good source of applicants for you. It's getting some decent traffic. We got some email subscribers and whatnot now. So like, would you try, actually posting some jobs? and I had like a basic contract and whatnot, and like their legal team took a look at that and like fixed a bunch of stuff for me basically, and that kind of thing, because like things were like unclear and whatnot. So they were actually, and yeah, they agreed. So Mercari was like the first paying customer that I had. In fact, there was a period of time when literally the only jobs were from Mercari.
Yeah.
So that's like a really great hack in general, I think.
Yeah.
If you're trying to, because the 0 to 1 with job boards is really, really tough.
Yeah.
It's a two-sided marketplace. So in order to attract applicants, you have to have good jobs, right? But in order to get the jobs, at least if they're paid jobs,
yeah.
you need to be able to say to the companies, you're going to get these applicants, right?
Yeah.
So at the beginning, you have neither.
Yeah.
So you need like some way to kind of figure out like that kind of chicken and egg problem. And one way that I did it was basically just starting out as like the company discovery platform, not even having the jobs at all, but just like having that as like a way to get some initial traffic and then some email subscribers from that. So then I could say, hey, I have these people, they're signed up. And then the other thing was just talking to my own company, getting them on board. And since they were like a pretty well-known company, that helped a lot. So then the second company I went to was actually Indeed. And I was like, hey, remember when I made that like list, that company list? You guys were number one because like I love you guys, you know. I want to tell more people about it, you know, because I feel like people don't realize there's this amazing opportunity at Indeed in Japan, you know. And they were like, yeah, right, like, you know. And it really helps because of the business model. We can talk a little bit about the business model if you want. It's free to create jobs. And that's true to this day, and it was certainly true then. I would basically make the pitch that, you know, to post the jobs, it's free, there's no risk. I'll help you out with like creating a profile in English, you know, native level English to like really kind of talk up the company, which is useful to them because a lot of them, they don't really have the ability to, I mean, depending on the company, like the larger companies do, but they don't really have much English presence. So to have just an additional website that's like from a third party that's like kind of like talking about them positively, you know, because they're one of the companies that we've chosen and curated that we're able to do that. And that was really valuable to them. And it was like, you get that branding for free, kind of like English branding. We'll create this, we'll put it out to our subscribers and like the people that view the site. You know, we got some SEO traffic and whatnot, and all that's totally free. Worst case, you don't hire anyone, that's okay. Like, that's on us, you know what I mean? Like, you still got your name out there a bit in like the English tech community. And
in a relevant talent pool.
Exactly, like the very targeted, like English-speaking tech community here. So it was kind of a no-brainer offer. Because I had never done sales before, and when I was trying to decide like how should I price it and everything, I chose to just not charge anything up front and then only charge when someone's actually hired, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to sell it otherwise. You know, I'd have issues with like churn because there weren't going to be that many applicants actually at first, so they wouldn't keep paying. Like if it was like a monthly thing, they probably wouldn't continue to pay for very long. And I went for the, you know, once someone's hired, then you pay. I went for that strategy, and I think it worked well, mainly because I didn't have the sales chops myself to sell it otherwise. But then I had Indeed. They were my second company. And once I had those two, since those were like two of the kind of the top companies, then I was able to use that social proof. And then eventually, I mean, even in that first year or so, they didn't actually hire anyone. It was painstakingly, you know, a process basically to keep adding more and more jobs, updating their jobs.
How long did it take you to get that first?
Like 12 months.
Okay.
It was awful because there just weren't that many applicants. You know, things kind of died down after the initial launch, and you start this like slow creep up because we were using SEO mainly, search engine optimization for getting traffic and stuff, which just takes a really long time to compound, and it just takes a really long time to get these things off the ground. And build, because a lot of it is also like the social media accounts and things like that you can kind of use to get some more traffic, but we didn't really have any of that yet. Obviously, we didn't really know how this business worked, you know? So just figuring that all out, it took about like 12 months before the actual first payment that we received.
Like, man, so many similarities with what I do as a recruiter, but like your solution is way more scalable, I guess, first of all. But it's the same approach, right? In the beginning, you don't have much, and all you can do is offer free services and say, hey, how can it hurt? You know, like, it cannot hurt you.
You have to be able to craft like a no-brainer. That's what I learned.
Yeah, that's awesome. But what drives you to, because 12 months to make a first sale, like a lot of people will stop, right? Probably a lot of people tell, hey, you know, there's like all those bigger job boards, that's why it's not gonna work. And like, I can just imagine so many reasons to just quit. Like what makes you keep going?
That's a great question. I think part of it was actually the timing because COVID essentially hit right around that time. Like when I first started the business, I was still going to talk to companies in person. I went to Indeed and met with like their HR people and stuff like that. And that's really hard to do when you have a full-time job. So I was having to do it at night and things like that. And actually then COVID happened, everything went remote, and I was able to do things via Zoom. So I didn't have to like, commute to companies and whatnot. And also like there was suddenly nothing to do because we were basically on like lockdown, right? So there was that period of time where I couldn't really go out anyway. So it was like, what should I do? Like after work or whatever, it's like, I guess I'll work on my startup, because what else am I going to go do? There's a pandemic on, right? So in a weird way, that actually kind of helped.
Yeah.
If it weren't for that, I don't know if I would have been able to continue, because it's true that period of time got really tough.
Yeah.
Because it was the kind of thing where I was doing a full-time job, and then at the end of it, when my day ended, I would have basically another full-time job's worth of work to do
Yeah.
on the startup this time. And I was working along with my wife, actually. Like we co-founded the business together, and so that was interesting, just that whole dynamic, right? We were.
Was your wife full time on this at the time?
So
when you get started?
we were both part-time.
Yeah.
And then really for that first year, we were both, we're both part-time on Japandev, working regular full-time jobs too at tech companies. And then we finally got our first sale after like 12 months of that, just wondering why it was taking so long. The other problem actually with recruiting specifically is that there's a really long lag time between when you're applying and when you're actually going to be joining the company. And since we were monetizing that way, we were basically waiting until they actually joined, or at least signed the contract, right? Yeah, and actually I think like until they actually joined, right? So, if they apply to a job in like August or whatever, they may not join until December.
Yeah.
And then if you charge, the next month or whatever, then it's like January.
Yeah.
And that's that cycle, that payment cycle when you're
Is there a refund policy as well in between?
Yeah, we do have like a kind of a refund policy as well, similar to a recruiter, where I think, it goes through various iterations and whatnot. I think at the time, it was just like maybe within the first month, if someone left, basically we would give like maybe 50% back, something like that, So a bit simpler than like the longer ones you see at recruiters, but even that could also mean that even when you get the payment, you don't know for sure that you're going to be able to keep it, right? So that's the other thing. But just the combination of that and us not really knowing how to actually get the traffic and stuff, I think meant that we had to wait quite a while before any actual money came in. But then when it finally did, then when it rains, it pours. That's the other thing. Once we got one applicant, actually succeed and get a job and go through that whole process, and we got the invoice and everything, then I feel like within the next few months, it was increasing like month by month. We were making like pretty decent money after a few months.
What did you do in that moment? Like the sale happens, like what do you do? Because I mean, I'm sure it's like you start doing a lot of things, and like especially it takes 12 months to make that first sale. There's two ways to look at it. It's like, yeah, we did the first sale, or it's like, well, we only did a sale in a year. We still have a reason to give up,
That's
like what happens at a moment.
Because it's not like a SaaS service or something like that where it's like, oh, great, we have a customer now and we're going to get this money every month.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it worked once.
Yeah.
Is it going to work again? Or is it just a one-time thing?
Yeah, it's not like proof of concept. I mean,
Exactly.
you just know it works, but like it's not enough. Like what happens? Like,
well, that's one of the worst parts is you don't know, right? But then I guess the longer you go of having a certain, level of, revenue that, it becomes a little bit more reliable. But, that first one, that was like, okay, is this the only money we're ever going to make? Maybe. We didn't know. So we couldn't like bank on that at all. We certainly couldn't, quit our jobs or anything like that at that point. But then, the next month we made money again. We're like, that's cool. Still, don't really know what to make of this, but that's cool. And then like, I think maybe 3 or 4 months in a row, basically. Maybe there was like one month where we didn't make any revenue, but then like we did again. And I was like, okay, we see a pattern now. But I still had to do all of like the development and that stuff. So it was this situation where I would like finish my day of work for Mercari, it'd be like 5, 6, 7 p.m., whatever.
what was most of the work that you had to do? Like
At Mercari?
No, I mean like for
on
Japandev, like this first sale.
Yeah.
Do you double down your efforts on one specific thing, or like, yeah?
A lot of it was just like basic stuff, to be honest.
Getting more jobs and
more jobs, more like, we would write like blog posts and stuff like that to try and get some more SEO traffic and, just improve the job posts. There's so many feature requests early on.
Marketing.
Exactly. Because we had like the ability to basically import jobs.
Yeah.
But, we didn't have all the extra stuff that you need, like filtering and searching and to like, make it easier to find jobs. Companies would constantly have like things that they wanted us to change or even just like update because something changed at the company and it's like, oh, you say that we're sponsoring visas for this role, but really we're not going to do that anymore or whatever. So there's just like this constant stream of that type of work.
Yeah.
So my wife was handling all of that at that point pretty much.
Nice.
But then when there was like something that needed some coding or whatever, I would have to do it. So I would like finish my day of work and then have that next,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. And then starting the next job basically. And that went for a while, maybe like another 6 months or so until I guess we had enough months in a row of like pretty decent revenue where I decided to actually quit my job too. And then I went full time on it. This was about 3.5 years ago now.
Yeah.
So like, what is that? Like 2020, like late 2020 maybe, I want to say.
Yeah. Full into COVID as well. And like...
Yeah, exactly. So there were some headwinds too, because that was another unknown as well, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we made some money this month, but like there's this pandemic. Are people going to keep coming to Japan? Like, does this service
no
still make
visas
sense?
as well and stuff.
They completely, exactly, right?
Yeah.
They made it impossible to come. So yeah, thankfully we were able to weather that, and companies kept, hiring despite that. I was kind of surprised actually, but what they basically did was most of these companies would still accept applicants, and it was just the kind of contract where it was like you'll work from your home country for a while, and then once it's possible you'll move.
Yeah.
So we actually had quite a few placements where like that were that style of applicant as well. So COVID, I thought it was going to be a huge problem, but we weathered that too. So
yeah, I feel like COVID probably helped a lot in that sense.
in some ways, yeah.
Even for you, right? Like you start focusing way more. You have less activities to do out there. People like the whole thing as well with the remote policies, because a lot of very quickly companies were like either like, yeah, we're gonna maintain remote work or not, right after COVID. And so I mean, I was on the other side as well, recruiting all day long, and I started my recruitment career right at the start of COVID as well.
Right.
And I was like, man, it's so good because like people are in front of the laptops all day long. They answer all my messages nonstop. I don't have to wait 6 p.m. to get a meeting. Everyone is able to hop on a Zoom call.
Yep.
And so I was like, everyone was like really complaining a lot about stuff, and I was like, well, I kind of see a lot of benefits here, and like,
Definitely.
That's interesting, and like, so it took you 2 years to say, yeah, Japandev is a viable business to go full time on, and
yeah, pretty much. And then so we were both full time at that point, and even then, like, I wasn't totally sure it was going to really pan out. So I remember when I quit my job, I was very careful to like try and do it in a way that I would leave the door open to maybe go back, because it was like I really like this job, this company that I'm working for, and if it doesn't work out, I hope that I can still have that as like something to fall back on. And thankfully, it's been a few years now, and it's continued to grow. Yeah. So that wasn't necessary, but that was like where my head was at. That was like, if this totally fails, then I'll just work as a developer again.
Yeah. I feel like the obvious thing is like, well, you were able to build a job board because of your software development skills, but reality is you didn't have any sales skills. And that's during the whole process, those 18 months, 2 years, you just learn to sell and like the marketing skills and all that part you just learn on the job. And so you had one piece of the puzzle first, and the whole journey is about learning to sell. Because, and I'm on the other side, which is so funny to look at it because I'm a salesperson. I'm like, but I don't have tech to really scale. So eventually, there's also an issue there. And
totally, that was it. You're right. I like many programmers, I think I had. I don't know, maybe a little bit too much of a respect for tech and maybe a belief that it was more important than it actually is. And it's really easy as a software developer to get kind of just caught up in like your own kind of technical projects and lose sight of what business you're actually working for and like what they're, how they actually make money, what is actually going to help them grow and things like that. I think most engineers could definitely benefit from just getting like a little bit closer to like the business side of things and the sales side of things, and understanding that like without sales and without, the kind of that the rest of the company basically that actually sells a product to a market that, wants to buy a product, you would have no job and no, nothing basically. Just having code itself, there's no inherent value there at all. It's a tool, right? And that I didn't understand that at all, but building Japandev really taught me that. It was like, okay, because, there's a tendency as a software developer to just like start building.
Yeah.
And I made that same mistake. I just built stuff, like I mentioned, there were no job posts, even though that's what people wanted, right?
Yeah.
I didn't think like, what is a potential way to make money? I was just like, this would be cool. I'm just gonna write some code. Like for the time being, let's just write some code, right? And everyone makes that. Like, so many software engineers at least make that mistake.
Yeah.
But then that not working and having to pivot and having to actually think about how to sell and whatnot taught me so much more respect for like that side of, the business and that, just like code is a tool that, can help with a business. It's not like the business itself, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel also if you don't make money, you don't get the best product, right? Like you don't have a proof that really people are ready to pay for something. Well, it's just a hobby, I guess, and you're not getting. That's the gap between a hobby and professionals, right? Like, but in the U.S., because I mean, even when it's a little bit off topic, but like, I feel like in the U.S., like Silicon Valley, this whole mentality, people get it a little bit more because I look at the salaries here in Japan and I look at the salaries in the US, for example.
Yeah.
There's such a gap. Like, is that, you think, the main difference, that people really understand, engineers that really understand why we pay for a product, and here people are really in their kind of role of building products, and there's I see it so many times with clients I work with. It's like there's this connection between the sales team and the business team, and then the development team, and they don't talk to each other.
Right.
So suddenly you can kind of justify always that.
Yeah.
Do you see that as well?
Yes. I think it's an issue in the US too, to some extent. Maybe that they've, Silicon Valley is a lot more mature, I guess, than like the kind of modern type of tech industry here. So maybe they've been able to kind of work some of that out a bit more. I definitely see it at least as an issue in Japan. And I think, like I said, pretty much any engineer, at least like the ones that I've, been around kind of working in Japan, could probably, benefit a lot from just thinking a lot more deeply about how their company actually makes money and like how they can really contribute to that, because that is usually the path to like promotions and so many just positive things that can happen to you in your career. Is like that's ultimately why the business exists, right? It's to provide value to some customer, and the more of that you can do, and if you can, if you can basically contribute to that, then you are valuable. Your salary is going to go up. Your position's probably going to go up. You're going to get noticed more. Whereas if you're just off in like the engineering corner of the office or whatever, just coding away with your headphones in all the time, then that might not happen as readily, right?
Yeah. I think where you got, lucky is that phase in the beginning where you have to sell yourself out there, right? You don't have the experience, so you have to sell yourself so hard, and you start realizing like, okay, it's not just about coding, it's not just.
Totally.
Because same for me, I meet so many like super smart people, like software developers and stuff, but they have this kind of tendency of like, but this is sales, I don't do sales. And I'm like, well, you will never truly own your craft, right? No. Like you will always have to work under someone who's willing to do like someone like you who's doing it, or like, this is interesting.
Totally. I studied. That was like my whole goal actually during that like probably year and a half or so. Like I read so many books, all the like, Robert Cialdini books and whatnot, like, on like influence and how to win friends and whatever.
Dale Carnegie.
Whatever it's called. Dale Carnegie books. And I read all those books. And, not all of them were like super helpful directly, but I like learn copywriting. Nice. Like made an effort to like, I would like sit down and handwrite sales letters and stuff like that to try and understand like, how to actually communicate in a way that like makes people want to buy a product or, want to do something. That was like a huge part of it, because I realized like I can't do this at all. And like, it's like kind of the main thing you need to do to like have a business, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy to think back and realize like how clueless I was about that and how like kind of in my own tech bubble I was just working at a, a company. Obviously I knew how they like made money. I knew what the business model was and everything, but like
Yeah.
I realized I wasn't really thinking about that day to day. It was more just like focused on the tech projects.
Yeah.
But that really gave me an appreciation for that. Like a business comes into existence when there's a product
Yeah.
that is worth something, and then a market, aka a person,
Yeah.
who is willing to basically pay for that product.
Yeah.
And until
Yeah.
that point, no matter how much code you write, no matter
Yeah.
how great how many tests and how great your code is and how performant, it's useless unless you also have that, because it's not a business, right? And I realized that's the actual core
Yeah.
of like what a business is and what I needed to figure out and like, what I had, focused on basically.
Yeah. And I think to get to that, because it's that willingness to get really good at something that's out of your scope, right? Because you can read one book, two books. Now you kind of read as many, and you know before starting that book, you're like, it's gonna be 5 or 10% value, and all the rest is repetition. But I will
Yeah.
still go after that 5% or
Yeah.
10%. And I think to get to that phase, you need to start something like your own product. I feel like
think
if
so.
you're an employee or if you're in a company, you cannot have the motivation to go through that. Like
Yeah.
it's so hard
Yeah.
because everything you say resonates to me. I'm doing so many things these days that I didn't want to do before, like a podcast or social media or all those things. But I'm like, man, if I truly want to get really, really good at communicating to a larger audience, because eventually, it's like what we're trying to do, right? Like because we're scalable and stuff, you need to do a bunch of things that you didn't want to do. But then if you do them, let's just get good at it and really look for every resource possible, right?
Yeah. And yeah, it's weird too. I think I'm not planning to go back and work as a software developer at a company anytime soon. But were I to, I think I would probably be more valuable now.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people don't understand about creating a business too. They think, oh, it's so risky to leave your reliable job with like the salary and everything that you killed yourself to get at this, like, I was working at like one of the kind of the top startups here in Japan. And I saw that as a big risk. But looking back, it's like, was it really?
The risk is probably not to do anything
I think
else,
that's
right?
the
Like,
bigger risk. That's what I learned. Like, because I always thought in the back of my mind that I would like to start a business someday. And, if you have no interest in entrepreneurship or any of this kind of stuff, and you're the kind of person that just, thrives in being in a company and that's what you want to do, that's awesome. Perfect. Like, more power to you. But I knew that I was the kind of person that, had at least an interest in, building my own business at some point. And if you are that kind of person, I think the risk of not trying is a lot bigger, a lot worse than the risk of maybe leaving a company. Because you're going to try, you're going to be in a situation where you have no choice but to do things like learn sales, even though you haven't really needed to before and you don't really understand it, because it's that or fail, right? And by the way, even if you do fail, so what?
You learned.
Exactly. You learn so much. And then when you go back to the job pool, let's say, and if I were to go back and get a job as a software engineer, I could talk to people who are entrepreneurs themselves, right? Because if you're talking to like the CTO or whatever, they're like management kind of focused people themselves, and they have mad respect for the fact that you went out and tried to build something. So I feel like it's counterintuitive, but if anything, it improves your value in the market as an engineer, and it's also just like fun, and like an experience that you're not going to regret having, I don't think, even if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, you go to like the core is like you can't really hurt yourself by learning new things. Right?
You really can't.
You can't, right? Yeah.
So I think people's kind of conception of where the actual risks lie is a little bit off.
Yeah, I mean, again, like a few months ago, I decided to leave my company, and people were calling me crazy for it. I was like, well, I feel like crazy to not try anything here. Because
do you regret it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Like not at all. Like
I can't find anyone who does, by the way.
No.
Like I can't think of anyone I've talked to who's like, yeah, I quit my job to start my own thing. It didn't work out. Now I'm homeless.
Yeah, no.
Have you ever met someone like that? No. It's like now I'm running this thing full time and it's awesome. And I am not, whatever. Like I'm free to do whatever I want in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. Or like, it didn't work out, and now I'm at this other company. And usually it's like an even better company than they were talking about before.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Or like a position that is like a better fit for them or whatever. I feel like I can't think of any examples of people who've really lived like the worst kind of version of that. They must exist, of course, but I mean, I don't see them.
But especially, it's all about, I mean, at least my approach, I'm sure it's the same for you. Like, as long as you don't shut doors, right? Like,
Yes.
the door stays open.
That's a huge part of it.
Because people respect what you do and you communicate why you do it, and you can't go back.
That was huge for me too, like I mentioned. Like that was kind of my main goal that like last month or so that I was at Mercari actually was like trying to explain that to people.
Yeah.
Because I would, make it very clear, like I'm not leaving to go do the same job at like a competitor for an extra $5,000 a year or whatever. Like I've decided that I don't want to be like employed at a company anymore.
Yeah.
And I want to try this whole other path. It's something that I've just been interested in doing since I can remember, and I'm going to go for it. I don't know if it'll work out or not, but like that's why I'm leaving. It's not anything to do with you.
Yeah.
I'm not running away from the company. It's just like I had this other thing I want to try. It's just like a whole separate path. 100% of people I told that to were supportive. You know what I mean?
And I'm sure when you're surrounded by your friends and stuff, like you often have that person who is like, Eric, I really want to do what you've done. And I know you spend a lot of energy having that same conversation we're having, like trying to convince them, but like, are you getting to a point now? Because I kind of gave up to fair review. Like I'm like, hey, if people want to change, great. If people want to change the job, great. But I'm not going to tell them why they should do it because I feel like what do you usually tell to, like, let's say you meet this software developer who has like 5-6 years experience and he loves to build stuff and wants to have his own thing out there, like run a business. Like, what do you tell them?
It's a good question. I think a lot of people think it's going to be easier than it is. So that is one thing, and that it's going to take less time than it does. Just starting businesses, it just takes a long time, to be honest. Like, you're going to be measuring like in years, right? Before you're really hitting any kind of like really significant. I mean, there are obviously a few exceptions, but it's so rare that it's very unlikely to happen to any random engineer I'm talking to. So like, understand that there's a lot kind of behind the scenes that you don't see in these companies. Like a company like Japandev might look very simple, but I could talk to you for literally hours about this one specific part of the site where there's these like requirements for the job, and it'll say things like, sponsors visas from overseas, or Japanese level is like conversational business, whatever. Like, you would not begin to imagine how long I have spent trying to get that wording right, where that both companies and applicants will understand when they look at it, like, oh, can I apply from overseas or not? Do they sponsor visas or not? Is my Japanese level like good enough or not? It's just this back and forth, and it's still evolving to this day, but it's like I've spent like many hours on like that one line on the website, and there's so many things like that you just don't see. So many just emails back and forth with companies, when you send them the contract and they redline it and they want these minor differences and whatnot, and it's like, it's this, like, there's no, like, why did you, there's just so many, there's a million things like that, right? That you're gonna have to deal with. And pretty much any business, even like a simple one like mine, to be honest, like it's pretty simple at the end of the day. There's all that stuff. And it can actually be very overwhelming at times. So just be, I guess, prepared for that. But the other part of it though is like what I was just basically saying, like, really ask yourself where the risk is. You know what I mean? Like, is staying at the company and just continuing to do what you're doing now more risky than taking the plunge and just trying it? And like, what's the actual worst case scenario? I think it's really useful to ask yourself that. Like, okay, everything fails, the company drops, it earns no money, revenue drops to zero, then what will happen? Like, actually think it through.
True.
It's like, okay, well, I was earning pretty good money up until recently, so I have some savings, so I'm not going to be on the street like next week or anything like that, presumably, right? If you're thinking about this kind of thing. So I can either get a job or like try a different business. And like, will you be more or less attractive to the job market at that point? Probably more attractive, I would argue, in most cases. So you'll get a job and go back to what you were doing. Like,
Yeah, you see things
Yeah.
coming, right? So
Right.
it's like the way I look at it is like, well,
Yeah.
it's not gonna be like, oh, I'm like homeless tomorrow because I didn't make a sale. It's
People,
like,
I think
yeah,
there's a part of you that like thinks that that's the case though, right? Like I don't
yeah.
know why we have like this
I
psychologically,
think
I
because
think.
people don't do it, right? And
Yeah.
so you just you only look at results
Yeah.
kind of thing. And
Yeah.
it's like, hey, it's not. It's like you say, like your product, right? Japandev. It's all
Mm.
those little things that you can't really imagine that if you don't do it.
Exactly. Exactly. So you just have to try at that, at that point. And then, yeah, I alluded to this earlier, but if you're a software developer specifically, don't just default to writing code
Yeah.
because you're not going to build the right thing.
Yeah.
Basically, you need to try stuff and then get feedback.
Yeah.
So you want the shortest possible feedback loop you can have between putting something out there and then, hearing from the users like, oh, what if you did this, and then maybe you can pivot based on that. And what I see people do is they build out these like super complex projects. They write all this code that takes like months, and then they build something that people don't really actually want
Yeah.
because it's so easy and like very familiar as a software developer to just be like coding, right?
Yeah.
Just be like, oh yeah, this is the project. We need to do this. It needs this aspect to it, and like all these things. And you feel like that because you feel like but you don't really know what people actually want until you just build it, and then using that as like a guide for what to build
Yeah.
is going to speed things up so much.
Yeah, and especially like that's probably the risk as an employee, right? You rely on the feedback quality and like that information from someone above you, but you're actually the one building it. So
Right.
you probably could get faster, and so the risk is probably here, like
Yeah.
you're
Someone
kind
else
of-
is doing that for you.
Yeah,
Whether it's
but
like
meanwhile you're doing the hardest part already. Actually,
yeah, exactly.
you're building that product, you're improving it, but maybe not based on what exactly is needed. And
I think a great exercise you can do if you're a software developer and you want to avoid wasting time writing too much code is basically ask yourself what the MVP is that doesn't use code at all. Like, what is the version of this business where there's no actual code at all? Like, for example, if it's a recruiting kind of business, it could be like the business could be Zoom calls and like a very basic contract that you can basically download off the internet
Yeah.
and like, change some stuff around. And it could be a CSV of potential clients and their emails. Then you make the Zoom calls, talk to them, send them the contract, and if they say okay, then maybe you write some code.
Yeah.
But because you see what I mean, though, it's guided 100% based on like the business side,
Yeah.
and for a fact that that you have this signed paper saying, okay, we want this. That's what you're offering is valuable. We're willing to pay this much for it. So then at that point, it makes sense to finally maybe write some code. Although even then, if there's like no code tools or stuff like that you can do to fulfill what's needed and what you basically agreed to in that contract, then that's a legit option. Maybe it can be like so many projects like could literally be like a Google sheet instead of like a website that you code yourself or like a Google whatever. Like there's so many businesses that could do
especially
that.
with AI now as well.
Especially with AI.
Like,
Yeah.
Especially also I'm thinking about people like myself who don't have computer science degree, who kind of until now always kind of felt a little bit outside of that realm.
Right.
And now it's like, well, game on. It's open there. It's like
That's going to be fascinating to see how that turns out because I agree like with the AI tools now, someone like you who doesn't have the coding background, I think the playing field has definitely been evened out a lot. So there's going to be a lot of people suddenly able to create, things that previously only programmers could.
Yeah.
So I don't know what all the implications are going to be of that. It'll be fascinating to see how things go, though.
Yeah, I think in general better user experiences.
I think so.
Like, we're just getting faster and faster there.
Yeah,
like,
more products, more startups.
Yeah.
Just in general, because the pool of people who are able to create one. I mean, you used to need basically a technical founder to do it.
Yeah.
And you don't animiore, essentially.
Yeah.
Or at least you won't soon.
Yeah. With everything you learned so far in the journey, like your first sale took 12 months.
Yeah.
With everything you know now, how long will it take you to get that first sale based on everything you know now? Like how much will that be shortened?
Wow, that's a really great question, actually. If I were to start over with like a new business from scratch.
Yeah. Like Japandev disappears, you have to do it again, but you know everything now. How long will it take you to make that first sale?
Probably like 6 months.
Yeah.
I think I could definitely shave like maybe half the time off, but it's still going to require some like compounding, some just hitting the pavement doing some stuff, doing some things that don't scale. Yeah, that 0 to 1 is always going to be pretty tough.
Yeah.
There are certain things you can do to like hack it. Like if you, for example, you make a partnership with someone with like a massive audience, and you say like, hey, I'll give you some percentage of this business that I'm trying to do. It dovetails well with like your following that are into this, and we want to make a job board for these types of jobs or whatever. Sometimes you can do stuff like that to like just essentially buy the like the traffic side of things.
Yeah.
And then like so there's stuff like you could do.
Yeah.
If you wanted to give up like some equity or something like that. I think that's worth thinking about as well, because there's a lot of people like that, a lot of influencers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you can find like a really good hack,
Yeah.
they exist. And I just think there's still a lot of opportunity in job boards. It's gotten obviously a lot more crowded of a space. So I wouldn't build like a general kind of overall job board at this point, where you just like, usually what they'll do is they just crawl tons of jobs from across the internet. And there's not really any alpha in that, I don't think, at this point. But if you look for like a niche that you know a lot about, that is valuable and like has high demand, and you focus just on that, and you actually curate it, that's the key. You have to curate the jobs, because the whole like the job board with just like hundreds of thousands of jobs that they just got from anywhere or whatever, that's kind of not valuable anymore, I don't think. It's more about like human curation. Like these are the exact jobs for you. You can basically go through one by one and have like a high signal to noise. I think there's still a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and I think when people go on, even like Japandev, like people also buy into your story, right? Like you kind of been there, you build it for certain reasons. Because otherwise, right now, you can quickly build like a Python script, scrape all the data on the internet, like give yourself all the information. But people buy into the brand, right? Like, so yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that'll be a trend too, just with AI also making it so easy to put out content now.
Yeah.
That like the human kind of side of things is going to be more and more of a talking point. Like we curated these jobs, like humans curated this, humans wrote this, humans whatever. Like kind of the anti-AI as like the pendulum swinging back. I think will be like more and more of a trend as well.
I mean, this is what we do with InnoHyve as well. We focus mostly on events, on face-to-face interactions, like the podcast, like all this kind of stuff, because we're like, okay, the tools are great, we get it. Everyone can use the tools. Let's focus on all the time we just saved, and what can we do more? And it's like more that human interaction and like
exactly
the human aspect. Yeah, it's super interesting. What any future plans for Japandev to kind of? I mean, you have to constantly innovate as well, like you say, more and more competitors coming, and like any plans to innovate that can be public?
Yeah, I think one thing I think a lot about is just the matching quality between candidates and companies, because I mean the issue that job boards usually have is that you put the job information up and then anyone can apply.
Yeah.
So that's great for applicants who want to apply to jobs, but if you're a company, then it can be very easy to create a situation where there's like too many too many applicants coming in. And I'm trying to always work on ways to kind of improve that matching so that doesn't happen. And we're just trying to invest more and more in some manual checks, a lot of code, AI-based checks and things like that. But ultimately, just deliver really high-quality applicants is what we're trying to do at the end of the day. And that goes on kind of both sides, like high-quality companies and high-quality applicants.
Yeah.
And if we have both of those, I think we'll continue to be successful. So that's really the main thing, I guess. And then even outside of the jobs themselves, I also want Japandev to be like kind of a one-stop shop for people who are software developers in Japan, and they want to make sure that they're working at like kind of one of the top companies here. So whether that is like visa information or any kind of like extra information that we can put in like a blog post or in like interviews with engineers, and give some more examples of, I guess what I'm trying to do is have like kind of showcase the positive side of the industry, because I feel like there's plenty out there already showing off kind of the negative side, which exists, and I will never like deny that exists. And there are a lot of companies that I would not want to work for when it comes to Japan and like the IT industry here. So it's a bit of a concern, I think, for a lot of people. So what I'm trying to do is like show that there are actually some great companies as long as you're kind of selective, and here's like how to get a job at one of them basically, and just if I can be the place you go to get all of that, then that would be awesome. So I'm trying to invest more in like content and things like that too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we really are meeting in the middle at some point, right?
Yeah,
Because
most
we're doing the
definitely.
same thing.
Yeah.
Love it. Like, what's the most fulfilling part for you to run Japandev these days?
Definitely when I meet people who got jobs through the site. There's no like nothing compares to that.
Nice.
You know, I met someone recently who said they were here because of Japandev. They're like, yeah, I moved to Tokyo, like a few weeks ago or whatever. I love living here, and like, thank you, because I wouldn't have been able to do it if it weren't for Japandev. So like, that's why I do it at the end of the day.
Nice.
Yeah. And I also just really love the tech industry here. I think it has a lot of potential going forward too. So many people, dream about living in Japan, and I've been here over 10 years. I love it here. I've, no desire to really leave at this point. And I think there's really the one pitfall is like the work culture.
Yeah.
Right? That's what people always tell me. Like, I would love to work in Japan. It seems like so awesome. Like,
Yeah.
but isn't it like all black companies?
Yeah,
And like
yeah.
karoshi? And I'm like, no, like those exist, yes, unfortunately. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, the average across the whole country might not be super great, but like, if you find the right company, there's like this cohort now of like really more modern companies too, the ones that I'm trying to showcase, right? And if you just work at one of those, you can have an amazing experience here, right? So I'm just trying to tell that to as many people as I can.
Yeah, even the thing about black companies and stuff, I feel like you gotta be here to really look at it for what it is first. Because I mean, I remember my first company in Japan, like it was a very Japanese environment, and I didn't like it, but I quickly realized also that was the problem. And somehow I learned a lot from that to kind of adapt to my environment, and still don't try to blend in too much, but like accept rules for what they really are, and like.
Yep. And
so yeah.
Totally. And there are also aspects, that you can kind of grow to really respect as well, and at least not like totally dismiss. Like in Japan, for example, it's really hard to fire people, and I personally believe that there should be some measures taken to make it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Because of like for certain like professional positions, you want to be able to really pay high salaries.
Yeah.
And it makes it hard to do that when if someone turns out to not be good, that it's really hard to actually fire them, right?
Yeah.
So despite that belief, I do think that like the Japanese style of like employment, where you basically are expected to join a company and live, stay there for a long time.
Yeah.
It has pros and cons too, because it is also very like stable, and the companies really do go out of their way not to, I mean, basically if the company is like earning money at all, they will do everything they possibly can to avoid layoffs and things like that. So like the stability is like next level.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who just really wants that stability, and you're not super concerned about like increasing your salary super quickly or anything like that, and you're okay to just kind of compound a little bit slowly, then like there are tons of great opportunities in Japan.
Yeah, the main issue I see with this stability is like it stops the entrepreneurship though. Like a lot of startups are stuck because they cannot offer necessarily a lot of money. They're also not offering that stability, and like if they do and they mess up, they're screwed. Like I see so many startups struggling with that. Like they can only offer 3 months contracts first, and nobody wants to do that.
I know.
And so if you kind of put that bar a little bit lower in general, I feel like a lot more companies can kind of grow and like I see that a lot.
Yeah, the concept has been gaining some momentum recently, actually. They call it like job-based employment, and some companies are trying it out now, where the idea is that like you have to be able to do this specific job, and if you're not able to, then we're able to fire you a lot more easily.
Yeah.
Because historically it's been like membership based, where it's like even if you are not able to do the job we hire you for, like you're part of our group now, and like we'll find something for you basically.
Yeah.
And I think the ideal would be to be able to choose and have certain industries and jobs that, like tech, for example, where you have to be moving very fast and like using the latest tech, and you need people to really get in there and like be specialists.
Yeah.
I think those should be, more of like the job focused, easier to get rid of them if they don't, work out type of situation. Whereas but I don't think it should be totally dismissed either, is what I'm saying, like the Japanese way of doing things. Because some people would prefer that. And I think having a situation where you can kind of choose and then do the one that makes more sense for that situation, I think is ideal.
going with you, honestly. Like, we have a tradition with the podcast to also finish with like a rapid fire set of questions.
Okay.
Those are questions. Don't think too deeply. Give me your answer very quickly. We're going through it very quickly.
All right.
At the moment, what book are you reading?
I'm actually rereading the Harry Potter series in Japanese.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you do in your free time?
Recently making a lot of espresso. Brought a machine. I got the grinder and everything. That's kind of my current hobby.
Interesting. What is your team favorite sport like?
I'm not a huge sports guy, but I'm from Philly, so like the Eagles, is a big thing back there. And if I'm going to support anyone, I would have to say the Philadelphia Eagles.
Nice. Ramen or sushi?
That one's tough, but I'll have to go sushi.
What is your personal goal right now?
Yeah, I think just I'm trying to build more of a team right now. Actually, in Japandev, I started as like a not solopreneur because my wife was kind of my co-founder, but like kind of just very bootstrapped, type situation. And I'm trying to systemize things a lot more, and I guess rely more on other people and hire a bit more to kind of take care of things and hopefully bring the kind of business to the next level.
See, if you could have dinner with a historical person, who would that be?
That's so hard. I don't know, maybe like Alexander Hamilton.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind
it's kind of
music?
random, but
Yeah.
yeah, he's underrated. He was actually like a super interesting guy, I think, but yeah.
Your favorite song to work on?
Favorite song?
Yeah. Like a song that you like, I enjoy working on that song. Or type of music, if you want to go for that.
I really just whatever Spotify serves up for me that day, to be 100% honest, because like I'm not focused on it anyway, so I'll just create like various playlists and whatnot, and I'll even just let Spotify like play like their kind of radio and essentially tune it out.
Full trust in the algorithm.
Yeah,
I see.
exactly.
Favorite way to unwind after a horrible day?
A horrible day. I like to go for a nice walk. Yeah, so if you see me kind of walking around Tokyo, don't be too surprised because I'll go walk around for hours at a time and just think about what went wrong that day usually.
All right. So let's not bother you as well. We know you had a bad day, basically.
Exactly.
So
That's how I work through it though. It's literally just walking.
Got it.
Yeah.
Eric, let's finish here. Absolute pleasure to having you on the podcast. It was so much fun. I think people can learn a lot from your journey. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
It was a great conversation.
Cheers.
Awesome.